not only do we provide culturally competence in February, but we need to provide that every month, not just in February, but we need to provide it more than once a year. Also, we need to, higher ups need to listen to Black and Brown voices. We need to listen to our experiences.
In a world where the recruitment of Black educators dominates headlines, one question remains: where are the conversations with folks who are leaving education? Introducing The Exit Interview, a podcast dedicated to archiving the untold stories of Black folks who have departed from traditional education spaces. I'm Dr. Adrienne Lyons, and I'm embarking on a mission alongside my esteemed guests. Together, we shed light on the challenges, triumphs, and experiences of Black educators, aiming to inform and empower communities to invest in understanding the crucial issue of retention in education. Welcome to The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. Welcome back to another episode of The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. With me, your host, Dr. Asia. And you know, folks, we've been doing this straight since 2021, something like that. And we're on to our 40th something episode, and they just get better and better and better. And today I'm super excited for our next guest, Dr. Adrienne Smith. We had a chance to talk before the episode, been all over the place. When we talk about teaching in Alaska as a Black woman, hold on to your pants, folks, because this is going to be a really good one. Dr. Smith, thank you so much for coming on our show.
Thank you so much for having me. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So like I already told them, you've been all over the place. And so we'll start off with, share with us your educational story. How did you decide that teaching the field of education in general was something that you wanted to do? How did it all start?
So it actually started when I was extremely young. I was in third grade and I used to daydream. I would go inside my head and be like, if this was my classroom, I would have it this way, and I would go about teaching us this way. But, as you get older and you become a teen, your dreams sometimes go away, especially if you don't have the right people in place to filter to help you develop those dreams. So I just let it go out the back of my head because I was thinking, I'm never going to go to college. College isn't a place for a person like me. And when I say a person like me, a Black person who comes from a low socioeconomic community and who just can't afford college. And I've never seen anyone in my family go to college because I grew up on my mom's side and no one I knew went to college. So that wasn't a place that I was going to go. So fast forward to becoming in my early 20s, late teens, early 20s. I was working at fast food restaurants and I was just again, daydreaming, as I always do, saying, you know what? Oh, I just want something more. But then Facebook became so prevalent at that time. I would see my white counterparts. They would be posting pictures of themselves at college, having a great time. But I would again go back to daydreaming. And I was hanging out with my dad one day and we were at his next door neighbor's house. And she was saying how there's a position as a substitute teacher at a Head Start. She said, you should go apply. So the next day I went and applied and I got hired to be a substitute teacher where I drove all over the Tri-City area of Virginia, being a substitute teacher at a local Head Start. And one particular Head Start was a night school Head Start. And I was a substitute teacher there every Tuesday. And I really just enjoyed what I was doing. And like I said, Facebook was so prevalent at that time that an old friend back from high school has sent me a message. He was like, what are you doing these days? And I'm like, nothing, just hanging out. What are you doing? I'm away at college. Oh, all right. Way to throw it in my face, whatever. He didn't know. But and he was saying how much he didn't like the college experience. So I was like, let me Google, when people tell me they don't like something, well, let me do my research based off of what it is. So I researched the college she was at and I applied and I got in. When I got in, I was like, I want to be a counselor. I went to school. I went to do a, what is it called? Where you tour the college? And I was like, I want to be a counselor. But the advisor there was like, in order to be a counselor, you have to be a teacher first. And I was like, okay, that used to be a thought. And I enjoyed working as a substitute teacher. So I'll go to school to be a teacher. And I loved it. I loved everything that I was doing. So I enrolled in the pre-K through sixth grade elementary program. And I was there. And that summer, I did not want to go back home just because, the life experience at home I was like, I don't want, that's not me. I don't want to do that. So I applied to be a camp counselor at it's called Camp Easter Seals UCD in Virginia. And they accept everyone who has a disability, cognitive, physical, emotional, whatever that looks like. They accept people who have disabilities. And it was a residential camp where they will come and just get away from their norm and just have a great time. So I applied there, accepted the position, and I stayed there the whole summer. Like I would go home maybe once or twice that whole summer, but I just worked the entire summer. And I went back and I was like, you know what? I'm going to apply to be a SPED teacher. So I told my advisor, I want to be a SPED teacher. So that's how I started.
Okay, this is making a lot of sense. So I want to back up a little bit and talk to you about this experience of you working in fast food and then working at a nighttime childcare center, which we talked about, you and I, a while back, about this like second shift childcare center, and that experience that you love that. And I had not heard of it, but it makes so much sense. Once you apply to go to college in a family who folks had not historically been going to college, what was that experience like? Did you share that with your family? Did you decide to keep it to yourself? People celebrated you? Did you feel like you got some hate for that? What was that like?
Ooh, that was an interesting time. I kept it to myself in a sense. However, I think my family was really happy. They were proud of me. However, I will say my mom at the time of her emotional state, that again, she was happy, but she was going through her own trauma as a Black woman, still learning about what trauma is, probably not even knowing what trauma was back then. So she was happy, but it's difficult to answer that question because it did not display its happiness. Like it displayed as aggression in some formats. But my uncle, he dropped me off at college the first day because my mom couldn't. She had to work. And my mom was mad at me because I decided to hang out and party all night before my uncle would take me to college. And I was super tired. But he was happy and he was explaining to me how he went away for a semester, but he was really sad, missing home. He missed his mom. So he went back home and never did anything. So he was like, you have to finish this out. And I'm like, okay, I will. So that whole time I changed my whole lifestyle. Just I partied literally from like 8 o'clock to 3 a.m. and came home, packed everything in my mom's car. She took me to my uncle's house. My uncle and his girlfriend dropped me off.
Yeah.
Like they drove me all the way there, dropped me off, and that was it. All right. So they were happy, but at the same time, it just didn't really show. But I think my dad's side, that again, they were happy, but it just was like, well, this is the college thing we
never
wanted
good
you to
enough
go
kind
to.
of
Like,
situation.
who ever heard of this type of, so.
Yeah, I love to ask that question because I think that folks in our audience need to understand that everyone is not necessarily bringing out the welcome wagon and balloons or pop, all the things when we make the decision to couple things. One, go to college if that's not been the historical context of our families, but also to go away from the family, right? To drive hours, even an hour when everyone usually is on the same block or the same neighborhood. And it's like you're trying to do something different. And again, not trying to paint your family as trying to be against you, but I just think it's really important that we talk about that particular piece of folks are making these decisions to be the first or the only, or it's been a while since someone's gone and they may not always get all of the support that they want, at least not in the very beginning. So thank you for sharing that. So now back to what you were talking about, special education. You went into special education. Continue.
Yeah.
I cut you off totally.
No, it's okay. So yeah, I went into special education. I came back from the summer break, went into special education, and was really just enjoying everything that I learned. However, I feel like my story had a lot of ups and downs and how I overcame tons of different hurdles. And my college at the time was going through an accreditation. So in the back of my head, I'm like, man, I didn't get this far. Y'all about to lose your accreditation. Like, this can't be the story of my life. You feel me? And so I ended up transferring. My mom didn't want me to transfer, but my dad's side was like, well, that ain't a good college anyway. So I ended up listening to them, transferring to a predominantly white college in the community that I grew up in. Horrible decision, horrible experience, hated everything about it. And my mom was like, I told you should have listened to me, and, all this other stuff. So I played tennis at that college. And as soon as this semester was over, I emailed the advisor who was like, you should do this. I was like, can I come back? And then I ended up going back there. And it was just really great experience for me because it was a historically Black college. They had a single parent program where people brought their kids to school. And they had a dorm room for the kids, and they shared apartments with other single mothers. I don't know if it was called like a prison reform program or jail reform, like people would be on probation, but the college offered an opportunity for Black people to get a good education. And then they accepted low GPA. So I was just like, they catered to people of different backgrounds who would have never thrived elsewhere, right? So I was thriving, but then the school lost their accreditation. Heartbroken. I was away at camp again the following year, and I was just so sad because I was like, oh no, I'm doing good in life. I don't want to go back to where I was at. So then all of my friends, we were like, we're moving to North Carolina. So I ended up moving to Raleigh, North Carolina to go to Shaw University. But then, so I enrolled, and they were like, yeah, you're going to have to kind of start all over in a sense because your credits won't transfer. Another heartbroken situation. So then we got word that the college opened back, like they were on an appeal process for their accreditation. And that was my last year there. Like I was about to graduate. So they opened back that October, and they was like, if you were a senior going into a senior year, come back. So my friend, she was already in that area because she was visiting one of her men friends. And I was in North Carolina working because I was like, I got to pay for it. I got to figure out a way to pay for this. But I ended up quitting that job on the spot, packing up everything, her stuff, my stuff. My boyfriend, now husband, came and got me. He took everything there. I got an apartment the same day and just moved everything into the apartment. And I graduated the following year.
I want to just point out to the audience, there's a theme here. Someone makes a suggestion. I quit my job. I go here and start applying for this job. I've gotten my card, right? And so I love, and you will hear this throughout her entire story, but that is a beautiful theme to know that when it's time to go, move quickly. Right? Sitting around hawing, asking 4,000 people about it, putting out a doodle poll. Like sometimes when the opportunity is there, you have to go. And I'm just going to go back a little bit about the child care center and then your father's neighbor, because you applied, but had you waited 2 or 3 days, maybe that would have been open or it would have been a different opportunity. And so I think that sometimes we get really, I don't want to say complacent, but we kind of get in this space of, I just want to mull it over. I just want to keep thinking about it. I just want to sit around on it. And sometimes the opportunity is not going to be there if we don't wait. And so I love that you're like, I quit, pack the stuff, move quickly. Let's just get this thing going, because that has to be the case sometimes. Maybe not all the time, but there's opportunities in our life that only come at a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to move quickly. So I love that. So, all right. So you're finishing up your senior year.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I cut you off, so go ahead.
It's okay. We're good. So I finished up my senior year it's called St. Paul's College. It was in Lawrenceville, Virginia. if I had $1 million, I would open that college, just give everybody the exact same experience that I had and that other people had. So I was finishing up my senior year and everybody was talking about, well, what you going to do? What are you going to do? You know, here's a job, apply here. And I was like, that's not me. And my boyfriend, now husband, we both was just like, that's not me. That's not us. We worked so hard in this period. We just need a break. We need a break. We needed a break from the people, like our family. We needed a break from that community that we were in. We were just ready to explore life. So my college advisor was like, just off the whim, she was like, here's a piece of paper and they're accepting jobs. They're looking for teachers in Alaska. Here you go.
Y'all hear this theme?
Okay. In the back of my head, not thinking nothing of it. Not thinking anything of it. Because I'm not going to Alaska, right? Like what? Never mind. I thought of that. So graduate from college, my boyfriend, well, I'm going to say husband, he was working at a fast food job and everybody left the town. This is a one stoplight town. That was done. I was like, no, I don't want to be here no more. And he was like, well, I want to be here. And I'm like, well, that's your choice, but I don't want to be here. And then I couldn't get a job there either. Thankfully, thank you, God, that I didn't get a job there. And we were in my hometown visiting my family and we just couldn't sleep. So we were at like a Walmart parking lot at 2:00 in the morning. Like, what are we going to do? And, that conversation. And I was like, I want to go to Atlanta, Georgia. And he was like, I got family there. I don't want to be there. And I'm like, okay. And he was like, I want to go to Alaska. Anyways, weird. Like, who goes to Alaska? So then we both were like, let's flip a quarter. Whatever the quarter says, we're going to go. So got the quarter, Atlanta, okay, Tails, Alaska. It was Tails, Alaska. So the next day, I started applying to jobs. The following day, jobs start calling me. I took a job, start selling everything in my apartment, getting rid of the following day, got rid of everything in my apartment. We came up with a day of when we were going to leave and say goodbye and move out. And that was sometime in August. So we packed as much as we could in the car, drove all the way to Bellingham, Washington, caught a 3-day ferry where we camped out with our tent and our 2 dogs and camped out on the ferry for 3 days on a boat and ended up in Ketchikan, Alaska for 4 years.
Yeah.
Your face. And that's all
I'm sure there's so many people listening to this like, oh my God, I could never do that. But you could if you wanted to, right? And I love that, you had your boyfriend, now husband, there to support and like, let's flip a coin, let's do the thing, and have someone to sit in the Walmart parking lot with you to have that conversation. Because I think many folks make those decisions on their own, or they've made that decision with someone else who's just not encouraging. And so I love that you have someone, and still do, who's like, let's figure this out. Let's not have fear, because it wasn't a let's stay here conversation. It was some other place versus staying here and just trying to keep figuring it out. And I love that you also said, thank God I didn't find a job in that place. I'm originally from Detroit. And when I was graduating from college with my undergrad degree in elementary education, Detroit Public Schools was closing 20, 30 schools. And I was thinking, well, how in the world am I going to find a job if all the teachers that were displaced who had jobs have to find one? And then all us new teachers have to find one with, I would say, one of the most powerful teachers unions I knew of at the time. So my boyfriend at the time, that husband was like, let's go to Colorado, right? And I'm like, okay. And we did the same thing. We had actually had a Penske moving van or moving truck. We had a 1994 Geo Prism. We hooked the Geo Prism up to the back of the moving van, right? And we drove across country. Took us about 24 hours because, it takes time, and our house planned. So we had a snowstorm in the middle of Iowa. And I think it was May, and we hit a snowstorm bad. All my plants died in the car. But we made that trek, and I don't regret it. I don't regret a single moment. I was afraid, but I had someone with me who was supporting. And looking back on it, and maybe you thought this too now, but looking back on it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was wild. But those type of decisions you make then make the next one much easier. Because you slept on a ferry in a tent with 2 dogs. Like, I could do anything at that point. But yeah. So you get to Alaska, and you said you were there for 4 years. Tell us what you did there, special education. Well, where you had other positions in education while you were there. What were some of the things that you did?
So the journey in Alaska was a life experience. It definitely was a journey. It was a learning experience, but nonetheless, I enjoyed each and every moment of it. So I initially took a job as a special education teacher. And when I took the job, I was still going through certification, like taking tests. I had took tests in Virginia for Virginia tests and did well in the Virginia test, but the scores didn't transfer over to Alaska. So again, here's another one of my stories of like, life just keeps going like this, up and down, and I'm overcoming a hurdle. So they were like, in order for you to be a SPED teacher, you have to pass your praxis test. But we're going to allow you to be a SPED teacher. So I was a SPED teacher all the way to like December or something, because I was struggling to pass the praxis exam in Alaska. I took it like 3-4 times, different locations, studied. I was just struggling to pass that praxis exam, heartbroken. So they were like, well, we have to have a certified person to be a SPED teacher. It's very different than it is here. So they were like, can you be a paraprofessional? Swallowed my pride and was like, I'll be a paraprofessional. So I finished the school year out at a charter school, an amazing school, amazing. You know, if my daughter lived there, she would go there. But I finished the school year out at that charter school as a paraprofessional, and I left the school system. I worked at like a community organization where they focused on like individuals with disabilities, children with mental health, recognizing disabilities in children from birth to like 3 years old. So I became I forgot what the position was, like a support specialist for individuals with disability. While doing that, let me go back a little bit. Prior to leaving the charter school, I was inspired by the behavioral health system there. And I was like, oh, I want to do counseling, because that goes back to my dream before going into teaching. I was like, oh, I want to do counseling. So I applied to Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia, because remember, my college had closed down and a lot of schools was not accepting the credits because my school was under an appeal. And this was the only school that said, you know what, we are going to accept your credits.
Say less.
With conditions.
Yes, say less.
I said, no, all right, let me assure myself. That's right. Say less. So I applied to their master's program in professional school counseling and I got accepted. And so I transitioned from the school system, working as a support specialist and still learning to be a professional school counselor the whole time. And then from there, while in Alaska, I transitioned that position and I became like a service coordinator for individuals with disabilities, just planning activities for them to do out in the community. And I was doing that while interning at a high school and at an elementary school for professional school counseling. But while in Alaska, I met amazing people. I learned how to deep sea fish, which I absolutely love, favorite sport of it. I learned how to properly kayak, absolutely love. I learned how to properly camp, absolutely love. Yeah, we learned life skills. Like if something was to happen and we couldn't afford our life, we would know how to survive. We learned really good life skills.
I will say, and it sounds like we're about to shift to a conversation of you moving. So before we have that conversation, I'm coming back to the family because I just keep imagining your family. Now we're in Alaska, and tell me, I have to know, what was that conversation like while you were there? I know people had to be so curious as to what the life was like in Alaska.
Yeah, so let me say this. Prior to moving to Alaska, one side of the family was like, again, that's not good enough. Why are you moving there? You're moving with some boy. Like that's the worst decision you've ever could make in life. And then another side of the family was like, yeah, girl, go ahead and do that. Like, what? It was something new. This is all right, I'm here for it. So then while living in Alaska, we didn't often come home. Let me take that back. But we would talk to family members. And when we did visit home and people seeing our driver's license, they like, Black people in Alaska? And I'm like, yeah, it's Black people in Alaska. It might be like a handful of us. However, well, what's it like there? So then we would have to give them the experience of how it was like. People accepted us. However, we did encounters like some racism, but that's everywhere. And I always told my husband, like, we used to have like deep conversations of code switching because I would hate when he code switched. That ain't you. Like, that's not you, you know? And then sometimes I would unrecognizably in myself code switch. But then again, I'm like, that's not me. So I hated that part.
Yeah, that's tough. And I mean, I'm sure you know it's not only Alaska where people are code switching or feeling need to, right? Because of our own like psychological, physical safety. We're code switching everywhere, unfortunately, for so many of us. And it can be so exhausting. All right. So we're rounding out our end of our 4th year in teaching and in the community work. And you're now doing, sounds like 45 jobs. Interning here, interning there, work coordinating activities for special education populations. And then what else happened after that? So did you move? It sounded like you moved.
No, we stayed in the community.
Oh, okay.
Where we were living at. We stayed in the Ketchikan, Alaska community. I will say when we first got there, we lived in a 5th-wheeler, a very small like trailer. And then we stayed there for like 4 or 5 months and then we found a house. But when I was finishing up my master's degree program, I was like, all right, I'm ready to go do something else in life. And my husband, he was like, no, I can stay here. And I'm like, you stay here. I'm ready to do something else in life. So we rescued this dog. His name is Pillow. That wasn't his name when we first rescued him. And I wanted to move to Thailand, but we had this beautiful dog. We still have him to this day. And I was like, we can't give him to nobody else because, you know, that's just horrible. One to find owner to another owner. So we ended up moving back to Maryland, where my husband is from. And we was like, let's give back to the Black and brown kids of the community that you grew up in, because you grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood. And let's teach them the skills that we've learned in Maryland. That's what transitioned there. So then I accepted a job as a special education teacher. I really didn't want to be a SPED teacher in Maryland. I wanted to be a school counselor, but it was hard to find a position as a school counselor at that time. So I was a special education teacher in Maryland for 1 year. And I left that job because I was like, this isn't for me. And I ended up taking a position as a professional school counselor. That was like an hour and a half drive from where I lived at, thinking we were going to move there, but we never did. But I was driving back and forth every day. So I would be on the road for 3 hours a day at that school. And I enjoyed the school. However, I was like, I'm not going to do this job because it's very taxing. I don't have social life. It was just a lot. I'm on the road. I'm at work. I'm on the road at work. So then I left that job and transitioned to a job in Washington, D.C., where it was extremely low socioeconomic communities, high crime. It was a lot of violence. And I worked at that community. However, that school, it was not good for my mental health. It was not the students nor the parents because I understood the demographics of where I was working at. It was the educators in the school system that I worked at.
Tell us more about that, please.
I used to call them. No, I'm not going to say what I call them. I would say it was the deacons. I was like the deaconess of the church. Like how some churches you go in and it's like, look at what this person got on. You know, you can see the obvious, like talking about you, or it was just really not good for my mental health because what I was taught as a professional school counselor, I was seeing everything that was against what I was taught as an educator, working in the school, and as a professional school counselor with the staff, not the parents or the students. But I will say this, they were really good for those students though. Like they provided resources and experiences for the students. However, again, if you wasn't familiar with the community, meaning you didn't personally grow up in that particular community or you didn't live in that community, then you might have been looked down on like, you're different. And it was an obvious sign that I was different.
I see that.
I'm trying to be very polite.
It's fine. That's totally fine. Of course, always. I think that's really interesting that you talk about make this closeness of the community and this pretty much a fear of outsiders. That's what that is, right? It shows up in bullying. It shows up in all these other ways that are very harmful, but it's fear of the unknown. And I think about going back to my being raised in Detroit and going back to teaching Detroit. When I graduated, I could see, because Detroit is, well, at the time in 2006 when I graduated, was so tight knit. I could see that if folks had moved there from other places, I could totally not understand, but I could totally see them maybe not giving folks a chance, right? Because of Detroit's history, because people in Detroit, had survived and thrived through the 80s and 90s and the shutting down of factories for cars and things like that. But that doesn't make it excusable. And to be feeling pushed out because the community is not accepting, in the same vein, saying we accept and love children for who they are. It's just such a cognitive dissonance, right? So, yeah, I hear you on that 100%.
Yeah, that's when COVID happened. And sadly enough, I hate that I'm going to say this, but if COVID was a blessing for me because school closed down and we went virtual and I was able to just focus solely on my mental health. I was still doing the work virtually at that school. However, it was a blessing because I didn't have to encounter those people on a regular. I didn't have to feel bad about myself or the strategies, or just hear how I wasn't, quote unquote, what these parents or kids needed. They needed something rougher, and I wasn't going to give them that tough love. So COVID was a blessing for me in that aspect. And I quickly, once COVID was not over, let me take that back. Yeah. So I quickly started applying elsewhere, and I went back to the school system that I took the initial position as a special education teacher at, but I was now a professional school counselor in that school system. I had to leave where I was at. Yeah.
I feel like so many folks were so glad, specifically Black folks, that COVID happened for the reason you're talking about, which is this time away from these toxic work cultures. Right. There were so many of us who were just so happy to not have to face. I don't want to assume that your community, you're talking about white folks in this setting, but we were talking about so many folks who just did not want to be in the space of dealing with white supremacy culture in schools, and people telling you how to teach and asking you all types of questions and trying to demean you in so many ways. I felt like there were so many folks that were like, I'm just so glad to not have to, even if it's for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or several months, not have to be in a school space. Again, not because of the students, not because of the families, but because of the colleagues, the administrators that made it really impossible to really thrive in teaching the way that they really wanted to.
Yeah. And it's sad because in my culture, I hear a lot of in the Black American culture of like, well, you just got to deal with it. Who will pay these bills? You just got to go to work and deal with it. Just eat it. But then you go home and you take it out on your family members at home because of the experiences that you have at work. You can't take it out on them because then you're going to get in trouble. And you don't want to take it out on your loved ones because they did nothing to you. So it was one of those situations that I would often hear, like, don't take it personal, just deal with it.
Yeah, that pushing down. And again, you haven't talked about the race of the folks you're talking about, but we talk about, I often, when I'm out in community at conferences speaking, I talk about the crossover and spillover of racial battle fatigue from the workplace to our homes, right? And like you said, we can't just leave it at work because people say they do, but they really don't. And we can't take it out on the folks who have harmed us. So we end up pushing it down and slowly eating ourselves away, or our family members, our community members experience that, whether that be not wanting to hang out as much as you used to, whether that be drinking more, crying in our cars, all kinds of hives and heart issues and things like that. And it's just so, so common. And I know this is a statement that I have no proof of, but I feel very strongly that COVID in some ways for some Black educators saved their life. And I mean that truly saved them from ending their life or having a heart attack their life ending, like all these ways,
Yeah,
and then probably
definitely.
save some marriages too, right? And save some relationships because people had a chance for just that small moment to pause and do some healing work, right?
Yeah.
Which probably, like I said, strengthened relationships, made people, especially if their spouse, their partner, their family members are at home with them, help them to strengthen those relationships they didn't necessarily nurture because they were in a toxic environment where they didn't want to talk about it and be with their families as much as they used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. Full transparency. This was a Black community that I was working in, but full transparency, which leads into the work that I now do. For many years as a youth, I was a self-harmer, and I haven't self-harmed in many years. But I will say, working in that environment, again, it was impacting my mental health. I had a relapse, and most people be like, a relapse. Well, it's true, self-harm is like a relapse. So I had a relapse for a split second, and it was mainly because I felt like I wasn't being heard and accepted again, I was taking what I was experiencing at work and I was taking it home, and I felt like nobody was hearing me. And most people who self-harm, sometimes it's like that emotional pain because you're experiencing the emotional pain from work, right? But it's also the feeling of I'm not being heard. My words are not being heard. You're not hearing me. So I'm thankful. I hate that I'm thankful that COVID, stopped me from working. I hate that COVID was a place that took other people's lives away, but it saved mine in a sense.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, self-harm relapse. Wow. Wow, thank you for sharing that. And so this is 2019, 2020. At what point, when did you decide that you were kind of ready to do something else altogether?
So it was March, right before COVID hit, right before we left school March 12th, 2020. I remember that day because it was just it was March 12th. It was I'm sick. I'm mentally sick. So I had a conversation. The CEO of the company, the school, as well as the principal, pulled me to the side in their office just to have a conversation of like, we noticed that you're doing this. Can you explain to me why you're doing this? And I was like, well, I'm planning on transitioning out. And they were like, why? And that's when I knew that it was time for me to go. I didn't have a plan, but I knew I was going to leave. So I told them that I was going to leave before I even knew where I was going to go. And then maybe a week or so later, I just started applying to places, and I got hired at the old school district that I worked at for 4 years, where I was a special education teacher. So I knew I was leaving March 12th, 2020. And then I transitioned. I got hired to be a professional school counselor at this amazing school where there was 26 languages and 36 cultures. And I thrived in that environment. I was thriving so well that I was able to start new programs in that school. I was able to just do the work that I was taught to do. But I was also being rewarded and praised for the type of work that I was doing that I brought to the school. However, the principal at that school, she never came to work. But I will often hear how colleagues was fearful of this principal. I didn't know the principal, even though she hired me. We had a few encounters of like, okay, hi, this is what I'm looking for. I'm like, okay, let me make it happen. But she never came to work. So the assistant principal was always took place for her role as a principal. And I was rooting for the assistant principal to become the principal, the head principal the following year, because again, that principal never came to work, and that was new experience for me. So I was rooting for the assistant principal who was, a person who wasn't a person of color. And
hold on, y'all. Hold on. Dr. Smith just put her hand up.
She was appreciative that I was rooting for, but the following year.
Folks, we say white people on this podcast. She stuck her hand up, folks, and rubbed that palm. And if you know, you know what that means. But so the assistant principal was the color of most people's palms. We got that. Continue. Go ahead.
So she was a person who wasn't a person of color, but I was rooting for her. Like, I thought she did a great job. But the following year that she became principal, I became super sick that year. I was out of work for like 3 weeks and I was on like medications because I was just sick. And the medication that I was on, I was like a prednisone or something like that. I forgot to call out of work one day. I forgot to put it in the system one day that I called out of work, but they knew I was going to be out because I was still sick. I emailed the doctor's notes and everything, and she wrote me up. I'm like, wait, what? So I went to work the next day, sick as a dog. And I was like, I need to have a conversation with you. Pretty much, I went in her office that morning, was like, why did I get written up? And she was very short with me. So in the back of my head, I was like, okay, I need to plan an exit. Yeah, because this isn't it. You know, I'm rooting for you, but at the same time, like, I feel like you just kind of like spit in my face. You know, like, you wrote me up. I did great work. The other principal, who's a Black lady, is always praising me and thankful for me. You know, just she's a great leader and a great role model. However, the white woman who was a principal, and that had nothing against race, was just like, yeah, but we needed this. You know, this is the protocol. This is the procedure. And I understand that you're now in your new role and you're trying to show everybody that you work with that you're serious. And I respect that. I respect your role. However, you know, like, this could have been a conversation. You wrote me up. You actually had to take time to write this out. And granted, so her and I had the conversation, and she said she never signed the paper. However, in the back of my head, it's still like, wow, that's fine. That's, you know, like, that's fine. So she knew that I was upset with her. She knew that I was highly upset with her. And she was like, we need to just have lunch one day and talk about it. So we end up having lunch, and she was like, I feel like you're very short with me, because at the time I was being short with her. All right, I'm hoping this is a professional conversation. And at first, my relationship with her was like professional, but at the same time, very encouraging. We're healing, let's have a healing experience. But at that time, I was like, hey, can you write me a recommendation letter? And I did that because I wanted her to know, oh, I'm out. You don't mistreat people that way. And they never wrote me the recommendation letter. And that's okay, because what she doesn't realize is she taught me a skill. She asked me, can I train teachers on strategies of, you know, how to work with students on behavior after school? Sure. And she said that we'll pay you. Of course, they did pay me. But I also did the research. I said, okay, well, let me do to myself. I didn't say this out loud to her. Let me do research on what if I was to open my own company up and teach teachers or educators on strategies, and they pay me and I certify them. So the following year, because at that time I was the mental health department chair, but the following year I said, I don't want to do that anymore either. Like, I was planning my exit strategy leading into the year that we're in now. And then I became pregnant. I was a beautiful baby girl. And I knew that I wasn't going to come back after maternity leave. Like, I didn't tell them this, but I knew that I wasn't coming back. And prior to becoming pregnant, I was planning my business. Like, I was writing the business out. I was doing trial and error runs of what that would look like. And it was doing very well. And became pregnant 2023-24, had my daughter in February, went on maternity leave January 27th, and never returned back. They just kind of started with my business.
Yeah, we're going to talk about your business in a second, but I want to pause because this story, there's so many layers, there's so many pieces, and I love it. And I think that our audience really needs to sit and think about, we're talking about working in fast food. We're starting our story off, and there's much story before that, but we're talking about fast food and tents in Alaska and this and flipping coins and showing up and showing up and showing up, right? And you said there were challenges and ups and downs, and I think that maybe that's one of the reasons why so many of us stay in places where we're not treated well, because we're afraid of the ups and downs, but we're experiencing them anyway. We're just experiencing them in classroom 4B down the third hallway, right?
They're experiencing.
And so I think it's important to pause and recognize, because I feel like in education, with so many of us, I'm no longer a teacher, but when I was teaching, so many pleasers, so many people who just want to do the right thing, or not even just the right thing, just follow the rules, right or wrong, no matter what, because that's what the rules say. And so it becomes a place for creatives being pushed out. People who ask questions, people who show up, people who choose to be brave are pushed out, or their spirit is stumped out of them. So I love that. And I'll ask a question, seeing how you work with Black folks who's caused harm, all the things have happened, right?
Yes.
What do you think are some ways that schools, school districts, unions, communities, what can they do to keep Black educators teaching, or being school counselors, or being administrators, or being paraprofessionals? What can they do to keep us, if you have any suggestions, within the school spaces, within education?
I think it's very important that, you know how like every year, Dr. Raquel Martin said this, and I'm going to quote her. Every year during February, we provide cultural competency trainings. And she did a great TED talk on how it's important that not only do we provide culturally competence in February, but we need to provide that every month, not just in February, but we need to provide it more than once a year. Also, we need to, higher ups need to listen to Black and Brown voices. We need to listen to our experiences, not take into account how we're feeling, right? But we need to provide that our experiences, and also take into account that we're professional and more than one degrees, you know, that we are to highly qualified, extremely qualified and Brown voice, the role listen to for our the role that we play, you know? We didn't just go to school to twiddle our thumbs. We went to school to learn how to help and support. So here are our experiences, our voices, as well as our professionalism, and take into account and take those strategies that we are telling you, please try this route, try this method. It works. Because what I've learned, and I don't know if other people have this experience, a lot of people who are not, a lot of white people will come to Black educators and say, I'm struggling in this. How are you able to do this? That's why it's important for them to hear Black educators' voices. Because, again, a lot of people come to us and ask for our strategies, ask for our, how are you able to make this work? You know, because I'm struggling on this. And we're leading them, but nobody else is appreciating our role as leaders unconsciously.
Yeah. And notice that Dr. Smith did not talk about Black people starting another book club and Black people doing things for free. I think that's really important, because what people may hear is like, oh, when we get back to school in the fall, that Black educator is doing great work, I'm going to put them in charge of blah, with no extra time for planning, with no extra compensation, nothing taken off the plate. And that's not an honor. That's not an honor at all. Yeah, I love that. The cultural competency, taking into account that we are professionals, hearing our voices. And these are things that people, every episode, we ask the same question, and people say the same thing over and over again. This is not brand new, yet it has not happened yet, where people are continually saying we're just not being honored in the ways that we should be, just like any other teacher, right? We're not saying give us a crown. We're saying respect our craft, respect what we're doing, pay us fairly, hear our voices, stop having us do just the Black History Month things or just BSA, and really think about us just like they think about themselves as the professionals they are. I love that. All right, so when we get back from our break, we'll get into what you're doing now and all my favorite questions. So, all right, folks, give us 2 seconds and we'll be back.
Hey there, beautiful people. It's me, Dr. Asia. Before we dive back into our conversation, I have something exciting to share with you. Are you a dedicated Black educator or support Black educators? Well, if so, we've got some great news for you. We're thrilled to introduce the latest addition to our podcast community, the Black Educator Be Well newsletter. It's a space dedicated to all things Black educator healing, wellness, and more. We believe that taking care of our Black educators is crucial, and this newsletter is designed to do just that. Picture this: exclusive insights into self-care practices tailored for Black educators, inspiring stories from fellow teachers who've overcome challenges, and tips for creating a positive and supportive environment at work and at home. Subscribers will get early access to our upcoming podcast episodes, special interviews with guests, and even some surprise giveaways. How do you become a part of this amazing community? It's easy. Go to exitinterviewpodcast.com or check out the link in this episode's show notes. Now let's get back to the conversation.
All right, welcome back from our break. We're here with Dr. Adrienne Smith, and she's sharing her story. And so now we're getting to my favorite parts of the podcast. And I'll start off with the first question, which is there a Black teacher, or are there multiple Black teachers that you would like to shout out who have taught you in your K-12 or higher ed experience, who you work with in the past? Any folks that you want to just say, hey, I shout you out, I honor you?
Yeah. First of all, I'm going to say my kindergarten teacher, Miss Wayne. She was an older Black lady. She wasn't my first experience in education, but she was recognizable. She was somebody that I remember because she was strong and stern, but nurturing at the same time. So I really want to shout out Miss Wayne. Fast forward, I'm going to go to college. Miss Emma Staples. Love Miss Emma Staples. She was an advisor. I looked at her as a mentor. Again, another Black lady who was strong, stern, had her own story to share, but a role model in a sense too. And she was the one who's like, here, they're hiring in Alaska. So she's a person that I often just think and appreciate for the role that she took in my life as moving into education. It's some really great employees that I've worked with. I want to say Camille Hill. She's a strong community advocate. She works in the school system. I mean, when I say strong, like this lady will work tooth and nail to find resources for those who do not have the resources, for those who lack. And then there's a one lady who I just came across not too recently. I worked with her for a few months. Her name is Cheryl Anderson, a strong Black educator in the school system. Doesn't have behavioral problems because she's nurturing. She's strong and she's strict and she's stern, but she also cares and she want to make sure that her students leave her classroom, knowing the material that she teaches them. But and I recognize that.
The warm demanders. We love a good warm demander. That was my role in education, is like, we're getting this done. And I love you. But we're getting this done. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I totally love that. You kind of alluded to it already a little bit, but you're no longer in the traditional teaching space, education space, right? But you're still supporting education. So tell us, what are you doing now? What are you up to?
Yeah, so I own Adrienne's educational consulting firm where I research trauma-informed practices, So everything that I do is a life experience that I've had, right? And I used to question myself, like, why did I go through this? And why is this the reason for that? So I research my life experiences and I make them into courses. So I write courses. I send them off to the State Department and I have those courses credited as a credit so teachers can take those courses. They can go towards their certification or their relicensure.
Oh, awesome. And so tell us, where can we find information about your organization?
Yeah, and so I have a website called Adrienne's Educational Consulting Firm.com. Adrienne is spelled ADRIENNE, and then consulting, Adrienne's Educational Consulting Firm.com. And then I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm on Facebook. The same, Adrienne Educational Consulting Firm.com.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And I love that you left, before you left, you had this idea of, how do I make sure that the skills that I'm learning here and teaching in the school counseling, I can use that in my own business. I can use that when I leave. And that's a great thing for everyone to think about. I know that people think, well, I'll just retire from here. I'll always do this particular job, so own a business after I'm finished. But it's okay to just think about it. It's okay to think about how you could support someone else, even if it's not a full-blown business, even if it's like consulting hours, just a couple hours of coaching here and there. How do we take some of this information that we're learning in this one space and transfer it to another? Lots of other careers do that. Lots of other careers are thinking, okay, I'm going to take this class. I'm going to sign up for this thing. I'm going to volunteer in this way so that I can use this for the next space. I want to make sure that teachers, school counselors, paraprofessional, all the things, everyone, family liaisons and admin who are listening to this, who are thinking about maybe it's time for me to take a break, a sabbatical, a rest, retire, quit. Think about these skills and they count. They always count. So thank you for that. And I meant to say that before. I think our last question is my favorite question. What's been bringing you joy these days?
Oh, what's been bringing me my family, honestly, my daughter, my husband, just spending time with them, our dogs, visiting my mom and my sister, my in-laws. Yeah, family has really been bringing me joy. My friends, oh, let me not forget about them. My friends, they make sure that I'm lifted in spirit. So, yeah.
I love that. There's always room for joy. Right? Mm-hmm. We talk about these challenging experiences. We talk about racism here on the podcast, and racial battle fatigue and harm. And, there's always going to have to be room for joy. We have to find that. So thank you. All right, folks. You heard Dr. Smith, Adrienne's educational consulting firm.com. If you want to reach out and find out about the courses that she's offering to folks. In the meantime, we will talk to you all later. Thank you and have a great day. Peace.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode. We hope that you've gained valuable perspectives and a deeper understanding of the conversation surrounding Black educator retention. As we conclude this episode, we encourage you to join our Patreon to support our work. Plus, as a patron, you receive bonus episodes, merch giveaways, and much more. Stay engaged with us on our social media, sign up for our newsletter in the show notes, take a look at our YouTube page, and interact with us on our website. Remember, the stories we've shared today are just the beginning, and your participation is vital for the future of education.